We all saw Steve Witkoff, who was instrumental in going and telling Netanyahu to, sign the deal that had been on the table for a year, which he did. And now there's an indication that Steve Witkoff is actually going to go to the Netzarim corridor to oversee the implementation of these ceasefire terms over the next few days. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why it's significant?
Yeah, well, that's what he said. He said that he's going to go to the Netzarim corridor, to that map that I showed you on the Salahuddin Road, and he's going to inspect cars that are going north. That's what he said. He's mentioned a few times that he's going to go to Gaza. I'll believe it when I see it. It'd be interesting if that's true. But he's very gung-ho about the ceasefire, and it's very interesting because his statements, they don't match Netanyahu's statements. They don't sound like they were in the same meetings together, because Netanyahu believes that he got guarantees from Trump that he is able to resume the war, that this is a temporary ceasefire. They're trying to get back as many of their captives as they can, which will only be phase one, because phase two hasn't been negotiated, and that's for soldiers. And the soldiers are going to be a very high price, and they're not going to be an easy exchange, whereas this part, phase one, is the humanitarian exchange that is an easier exchange to make. So Netanyahu, the understanding in Israel is that Netanyahu believes that he can go back to war, and that he got that guarantee from Witkoff and Trump, and he got the weapons to do it too, because there was some weapon shipments that were sort of being blocked by Biden at the end. A couple large shipments of D9 Caterpillar bulldozers were being not blocked, but delayed, kind of red taped a little bit. And Netanyahu claims that he got from Witkoff a guarantee from Trump to get those weapons and to return to war. Witkoff doesn't say it that way. He says he's committed to all three phases of the ceasefire, and his way of saying that, as proof of that, he's literally going to go inspect cars in the Netzarim corridor, which would be remarkable.
Yeah. And we did mention that in a special broadcast on Sunday, which I highly recommend to people if you haven't seen it. And of course, you'll find it on the YouTube channel. But Witkoff's comments, he made some other comments this week that I want to briefly mention. But there have been some doubts about the ceasefire because of a comment that Trump made, and I think we can watch that video. Let's take a quick look.
The president that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the three phases of the deal.
I'm not confident. It's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident, but I think they're very weakened on the other side. Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help in rebuilding Gaza?
I might. Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things can be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things can be done with Gaza.
How do you see the future governance for Gaza?
Well, it depends. I can't imagine you certainly can't have the people that were there. Most of them are dead.
So yeah, just to reiterate that, he says multiple times, I am not confident, to that question, the question from the press corps saying, will the ceasefire hold? Trump says, I'm not confident twice in a row. And then Witkoff was on Fox News, I believe it was yesterday, and they asked him about that. And Witkoff said he doesn't disagree with Trump. So there's sort of two things going on here that don't match. That the meetings between Witkoff and Netanyahu don't match. The gung-ho nature of Witkoff saying he thinks all three phases of this deal will happen don't seem to match his boss's confidence. So.
Well, the statements from Israeli officials, they're known to essentially make things up. They are trying to impose their will. That seems to me to be the reality of it, and they're trying to talk some things into existence. I think a lot remains to be seen about the reality of what's going to happen.
And of course, remember that when in our discussion on Sunday, we talked about that NBC story, which quoted an unnamed Trump official saying, look, it's not just Hamas that could destroy this, it's Israel as well. Israel is trying to, they basically said Israel is more likely, that's how I interpret it, to try to destroy the ceasefire. So that could be what they're signaling to here. I know people are going to say, Ali, you're being too optimistic, but I am trying to read the tea leaves here. And I want them to be committed to the ceasefire. I'm not trying to kid myself, but they put a lot of capital into getting it. Why would they not want it to work? Why would Witkoff go out on a limb and say he's committed to these three phases? The other thing that Trump said that was interesting there, he said, it's not our war, it's their war. And that's very interesting phrasing, because think about how Joe... Yes, think about how Joe Biden presented this as, we're fighting, we and Israel are fighting shoulder to shoulder. We'll do anything for Israel. And Netanyahu, in Congress and in many statements, has said, we are fighting for you. We're fighting on the front lines of Western civilization against savagery. And one interpretation of Trump's comments is to say, no, it's not our war. And you can go back to war if you want to, but the implication there is don't expect us to pay for it. Now, that's my rosiest interpretation of Trump's comments. As for his comments about Gaza being we could do beautiful things there, that's fine. This is a real estate guy. He builds resorts, he builds casinos. That's what he became famous for. He can make whatever plans he wants, but he's going to have to get them past the Qassam Brigade's zoning committee. And no one has been able to do that. So again, don't get carried away with, Trump wants to do this and Jared Kushner wants to do that. And well, fine, but you got to get the permission of the Qassam Brigades, and that hasn't gone well for them.
Exactly. This is the reality. Like, I've seen a lot of activists in recent days and recent weeks say things like, there is no ceasefire, put a ceasefire in scare quotes and say, the so-called ceasefire, etc., etc. Now, look, I understand why people are skeptical, like, to say the least. Like, we cannot trust Israel's intentions. And when you see, and we haven't really had time to get into it on this week's live stream, but when you see what's been happening in the West Bank, the escalation of Israeli crimes in the West Bank, rounding people, in Jenin and in other places in the West Bank, it's understandable that people are skeptical about the ceasefire. But you've got to keep things in perspective. Israel always does what it wants. Israel always carries out massacres and killings, and in a way, there's been no ceasefire for 100 years. That's the reality of it. But what happened in Gaza was not nothing. This ceasefire is not nothing. We've seen people's celebrations in Gaza, and they're not, doing that to be gung-ho. There's a reason for that. There has been a substantive difference to what Israel is doing, and John has just covered in detail of how the Israeli troops are withdrawing. So this is a real thing. We should keep it in perspective, while at the same time, obviously, being skeptical and monitoring it closely. And I think these political developments are really, really significant. We can't, again, like I said on the special live stream on the weekend, I can't think of anything this politically significant from an American administration in terms of its how it relates to the Israelis since the George H.W. Bush era, where there was talk of sanctions and so forth.
Well, they're not getting the prisoners back. So the phase 2 is the soldiers. So if Israel has other plans for the ceasefire, they're not getting their soldiers back. Exactly. That's not going to happen. And the way the deal has been structured is because Qassam knows that Israel just wants to get its people back, and then it will renege on everything that has been agreed to. So the way that this has been built is to prevent that. So the negotiations start on February 16th for the second phase, and that's when things we'll really see how serious Trump and Netanyahu are about the ceasefire, because that will be when they make the decision to either abandon their soldiers and return to war. And they've known for the last 15 months that the terms don't change. Qassam's terms don't change. They'll only increase. So that's the significance of the second part of the exchanges. It's the soldiers.
And one other little tidbit on this. Tamara, if you could put up that article I just sent to you. This is from antiwar.com, but it's quoting comments in other media that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, said Wednesday that it was good that Hamas was open to talks with the United States. Witkoff was asked in an interview with Fox News about comments from Musa Abu Marzouk, a Hamas official based in Qatar, quote, "We're prepared for a dialogue with America and achieving understandings on everything," Abu Marzouk said, according to the New York Times. In response, Witkoff said, "Well, I think it's good if it's accurate. I think we were able to demonstrate that President Trump's policies, peace through strength, they work. Everybody listens." Again, that's very odd, because you can't imagine anyone in the Biden administration even entertaining the idea of talking to Hamas.
Yes, never.
Yeah, so what it means, I don't know, but it's we need to just be aware these things are happening and not pretend that they're not happening. What they mean...
Exactly. We have to deal with objective reality here. Like, this headline alone, this quote alone is hugely, hugely significant. Okay, let's just say it comes to nothing. Let's just say it's all a lie. Even the fact that it's being said is massive, because he's just raising the prospects of the United States negotiating with Hamas, which is they've outlawed as a terrorist organization in their phrase. Again, this is potentially a hugely significant political move. Not move, but indication, let's say. It's huge. It goes back to the days of when the United States was negotiating with the PLO, the PLO was outlawed, and it was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as it was under Yasser Arafat back in the days, and it was against the law to negotiate with the PLO until it was impossible until it's done, as Nelson Mandela was famously said. So, it looks impossible at the moment the United States or Britain or any other Western country would negotiate with Hamas, but directly. Again, it always looks impossible till it's done. And again, maybe this will come to nothing, but just the fact that there is this kind of talk is in and of itself highly significant, and it does feel like it's kind of being largely ignored at the moment.